Lila, a 29-year-old working remotely, living with her parents in the family home, never imagined her peaceful life would be disrupted by the increasingly frequent visits of Sophie, her sister-in-law. Sophie, with her confident demeanor and charming style, always made Lila feel small, even in her own house. Initially, Lila thought Sophie simply wanted to be closer to her husband's family, but Sophie's excessive comfort in her personal space made Lila uneasy. Sophie not only visited but also began to intrude into Lila's personal life in an uncomfortably natural way. She frequently asked why Lila was still single, even suggesting that perhaps Lila needed to change her style to become more attractive. Sophie offered to teach Lila how to do makeup and choose suitable outfits, as if she were playing the role of a caring older sister. Although Lila initially felt grateful for this attention, the increasing encroachment on her privacy made everything feel suffocating. One day, Sophie walked into Lila's room without being invited, excitedly opened the wardrobe, and began rummaging through each item of clothing. "Let's go through your wardrobe," Sophie said with a radiant smile, but without waiting for Lila's agreement. Although feeling uncomfortable, Lila tried to remain calm, telling herself that Sophie was just trying to help her. But when Sophie started commenting on each item and left a mess behind her, Lila's patience began to wear thin. Such visits continued to occur and became commonplace. Lila's parents seemed very pleased to have Sophie around and often said, "It's great that you have an older sister like Sophie to guide you." But for Lila, Sophie's presence was not only a reminder of the differences between them but also the source of growing doubts in her heart. Did Sophie genuinely have good intentions, or was there something else hidden behind those seemingly innocent actions? As Sophie's visits became more frequent, Lila couldn't shake the growing unease that something wasn't quite right. At first, Sophie's actions seemed harmless, playful comments about Lila's wardrobe, light-hearted suggestions for improving her style, but they soon escalated into a pattern of intrusion. Sophie began treating Lila's room as if it were her own, walking in uninvited and rummaging through personal belongings under the guise of helping. Each visit left Lila feeling more like a guest in her own home. One afternoon, Sophie arrived with her usual enthusiasm, carrying a large tote bag. "Let's do something fun today," she exclaimed, heading straight for Lila's closet without waiting for a response. She pulled out dresses, jackets, and accessories, tossing them onto the bed as if she were preparing for a fashion show. "You have such great taste," Sophie remarked with a smile, but her tone carried an air of surprise that stung. Lila forced a polite laugh, masking her discomfort as Sophie continued to critique and rearrange her belongings. By the time Sophie left that evening, Lila's room was in disarray, clothes scattered everywhere, drawers left half open. As she began tidying up, she noticed something odd: a pair of earrings she cherished was missing. At first, she thought she might have misplaced them, but after searching thoroughly, a troubling thought crept into her mind. Could Sophie have taken them? The idea seemed absurd. Why would her sister-in-law steal from her? Yet the nagging suspicion refused to go away. The following weeks only deepened Lila's doubts. More items disappeared, small things at first, a lipstick here, a scarf there, but each loss felt like another piece of her trust being chipped away. Meanwhile, Sophie's behavior grew bolder. She began making offhand comments about how the house could be better utilized if it were more lively, hinting at plans that didn't seem to include Lila. "Before I share what happened next, the moment that turned my life upside down, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Have you ever felt like someone was crossing boundaries in your life? If so, drop your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you handled it. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against all odds, hit that like button. Trust me, this story is just getting started." Determined to uncover the truth, Lila decided it was time to take action. She purchased a discreet security camera and installed it in her room, hoping to either confirm or dispel her suspicions once and for all. As she set up the device late one night, a mix of anxiety and resolve coursed through her veins. Whatever Sophie's intentions were, Lila knew she couldn't live in uncertainty any longer. Lila sat quietly in her room, her heart pounding as she reviewed the footage from the hidden camera. The video left no room for doubt: Sophie had been stealing from her. The camera captured Sophie casually slipping Lila's makeup, jewelry, and even a small decorative trinket into her oversized tote bag while pretending to organize the room. Lila's hands trembled with a mix of anger and disbelief. It wasn't just the theft that hurt, it was the betrayal by someone who was supposed to be family. Determined to confront the situation head-on, Lila transferred the footage to her phone and prepared herself for what would undoubtedly be a tense conversation. That evening, during dinner, she decided it was time. "I need to talk to everyone," she announced, her voice steady but firm. Her parents and Ethan looked up curiously, while Sophie froze mid-bite, her cheerful demeanor faltering for a split second before she quickly regained composure. Lila began calmly, "I've noticed some things going missing from my room recently: makeup, clothes, personal items. At first, I thought I might have misplaced them, but it kept happening." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "So I installed a camera in my room to figure out what was going on." The room fell silent. Sophie's fork clattered against her plate as she nervously glanced at Ethan. "I have proof," Lila said, pulling out her phone and playing the footage for everyone to see. The video showed Sophie rummaging through Lila's belongings and slipping items into her bag with practiced ease. Gasps filled the room as their parents stared at the screen in shock. Ethan's face turned red with anger, not at Sophie, but at Lila. "How dare you spy on family?" Ethan snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "This is an invasion of privacy. You're so ungrateful for everything we've done for you." His words stung, but Lila refused to back down. "Ungrateful?" she retorted, her voice rising slightly. "I've been paying the property taxes on this house for years while working remotely to support myself. Meanwhile, Sophie has been stealing from me under your nose." She turned to Sophie, whose face was now pale with embarrassment. "And you, what excuse do you have for this?" Sophie stammered incoherently, unable to form a coherent defense. Ethan quickly jumped in to shield her. "You're just jealous because Sophie is trying to help you improve your life. You sit around all day doing nothing while she actually contributes something meaningful." Lila laughed bitterly at his words. "Doing nothing? I work remotely and earn my own income while living here because it's convenient for all of us. But since you think I'm such a burden," she took a deep breath before delivering the final blow. "This house is in my name. I've been paying for it all along, and now I've decided, I'm selling it." The room erupted into chaos as everyone began speaking at once. Ethan yelled about how unfair it was, Sophie tried to plead innocence, and their parents looked utterly bewildered by the revelation. But Lila remained calm amidst the storm. She had made up her mind, this was no longer her home. With that final declaration hanging in the air like a thunderclap, Lila stood up and walked out of the dining room. She knew there would be consequences for what she had just done, but for the first time in years, she felt free. Lila's decision to sell the house sent shockwaves through her family, but the confrontation that followed was inevitable. The next morning, she gathered everyone in the living room. Her parents sat on the couch, looking uneasy, while Ethan leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. Sophie, unusually quiet and fidgety, avoided Lila's gaze. The tension in the air was palpable. "I want to make something clear," Lila began, her voice steady but firm. "This house is legally mine. I've been paying the property taxes for years, and I've decided to sell it." The room fell silent for a moment before Ethan erupted. "You can't be serious," he shouted, his face red with anger. "This is our family home. You can't just kick us out like this." Lila met his glare calmly. "I'm not kicking anyone out. I'm giving you and Sophie time to make other arrangements. But I won't stay in a place where my privacy is constantly violated, and my contributions are dismissed." Sophie finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Lila, I didn't mean to upset you. I was just trying to help." "Help?" Lila interrupted, her tone sharp. "Is that what you call stealing from me? Because that's exactly what you've been doing." She pulled out her phone and played the camera footage for everyone to see. The video showed Sophie rummaging through Lila's belongings and slipping items into her bag with practiced ease. Their parents gasped in shock. "Sophie, how could you?" their mother whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Ethan immediately jumped to Sophie's defense. "This is ridiculous. You invaded her privacy by spying on her. Who does that to family?" Lila's patience was wearing thin. "Who steals from family?" she shot back. "I didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is right here." Ethan turned to their parents, desperate for support. "Mom, Dad, you can't let her do this. She's tearing this family apart." But their father shook his head solemnly. "Ethan, we didn't know about this, and we can't ignore what Sophie did." Sophie broke down into tears, pleading with Lila. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I did it. Please don't sell the house." Lila took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Sophie, I appreciate your apology, but this isn't just about the theft. It's about respect, something I haven't felt in this house for a long time." She looked at Ethan and added firmly, "And you've made it clear that you don't value me or what I've done for this family." Ethan scoffed bitterly. "You're just being selfish." "No," Lila replied calmly but with conviction. "For once in my life, I'm standing up for myself." The room descended into chaos as Ethan continued shouting and Sophie sobbed uncontrollably. Their parents sat silently, their expressions a mix of guilt and regret. But Lila remained composed amidst the storm. She had said everything she needed to say. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to grapple with the consequences of their actions. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of clarity and freedom. She was finally taking control of her life. The fallout from Lila's decision to sell the house was swift and chaotic. The morning after the confrontation, she began packing her belongings with quiet determination. Her parents, still reeling from the revelation of Sophie's theft and the legal ownership of the house, hovered uncertainly, unsure of how to approach her. Ethan, however, was far from silent. He stormed into the living room where Lila was sorting through boxes, his face a mask of fury. "This is insane, Lila," he shouted, slamming his hand on the dining table. "You can't just uproot everyone's lives because of some petty grudge against Sophie. She made a mistake, get over it." Lila didn't even look up. "This isn't about a grudge, Ethan," she said calmly. "This is about respect, something I've been denied in this house for far too long." Ethan scoffed. "Respect? You're the one disrespecting this family by selling our home out from under us." "Our home?" Lila finally turned to face him, her voice steady but sharp. "You mean my home, the one I've been paying taxes on for years while you and Sophie treated it like your personal playground?" Their mother stepped in then, her voice trembling. "Lila, please, can't we work this out as a family? Selling the house is such a drastic step." Lila sighed, her resolve unwavering. "I've made my decision, Mom. I've spent too many years putting everyone else's needs before my own. It's time for me to prioritize myself." Sophie entered the room at that moment, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. "Lila," she began hesitantly, "I know I've made mistakes, but, do you really have to do this? Can't we find another way?" Lila's gaze was cold but measured. "Sophie, you didn't just make mistakes. You stole from me, repeatedly, and then tried to play the victim when you were caught. This isn't just about what you did, it's about what it represents. I can't live in a place where my boundaries are constantly violated." The tension in the room was suffocating as everyone processed her words. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue further, but their father placed a hand on his shoulder and shook his head. For once, he seemed to understand that Lila wasn't going to back down. The following days were a whirlwind of activity as Lila prepared to move out. She hired movers to help with the larger items and enlisted a few close friends for support. As they packed up her furniture and personal belongings, Ethan and Sophie watched from the sidelines, their expressions a mix of disbelief and resentment. "You're really doing this," Ethan muttered bitterly as Lila supervised the loading of her things onto the moving truck. "Yes," she replied simply, not bothering to elaborate. Sophie tried one last time to appeal to her. "Lila, please think about what this will do to your parents. They love this house, they've lived here for decades. And they'll have plenty of time to figure out their next steps, Lila said firmly. I'm giving them notice before I sell it. That's more than fair. By the time everything was packed and ready to go, Lila felt an unexpected sense of relief wash over her. The weight of years of frustration and resentment seemed to lift as she prepared to leave behind the toxic environment that had stifled her for so long. As she climbed into her car to follow the moving truck to her new apartment, she glanced back at the house one last time. Ethan was standing on the porch with their parents, his arms crossed and his jaw set in defiance. Sophie stood slightly behind him, looking pale and defeated. Their parents appeared conflicted, torn between their loyalty to Ethan and their growing realization that they had underestimated Lila's strength. Driving away from the house felt like closing a chapter, a painful but necessary step toward reclaiming her independence and self-worth. In the weeks that followed, Lila settled into her new apartment and began building a life free from the constraints of her family's expectations. She decorated her space with care, turning it into a sanctuary where she could focus on her work and personal growth without interruption. Meanwhile, back at the family home, things quickly unraveled. Without Lila's financial contributions or steady presence, Ethan and Sophie struggled to manage household expenses on their own. Their parents' reliance on Ethan for support only added to the strain, creating tension that soon boiled over into frequent arguments. One day, Lila received an email from an old neighbor who still lived near her childhood home. "Your brother and his wife are having a hard time," it read simply. "Your parents are putting pressure on them now that you're gone." Lila read the message without emotion. She had anticipated this outcome but felt no obligation to intervene. For once in her life, she was free from their drama, and she intended to keep it that way. Months later, while attending a local event with friends, Lila spotted Sophie across the room. She looked thinner and more tired than Lila remembered, a shadow of her former self. Sophie hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Lila," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the noise of the crowd. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything." Lila regarded her coolly for a moment before replying. "Thank you for saying that." Then she turned and walked away without another word. For Lila, forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, it meant letting go of the past so she could fully embrace her future. And as she returned home that evening to her peaceful apartment filled with light and possibility, she knew she had made the right choice. After leaving behind the chaos of her family home, Lila's life entered a new chapter, one filled with peace, independence, and the freedom to finally focus on herself. Her new apartment, a cozy space filled with natural light and warm tones, became her sanctuary. Every piece of furniture she brought with her was carefully arranged to create a sense of calm and order, a stark contrast to the turmoil she had just escaped. For the first time in years, Lila felt like she could breathe. The mornings were her favorite. She would wake up early, brew a cup of coffee, and sit by the large window in her living room, watching the city slowly come to life. The quiet hum of cars in the distance and the soft chirping of birds provided a soothing backdrop as she planned her day. Without the constant interruptions and tension that had defined her life before, Lila found herself more productive than ever. Her remote work flourished, and she even started exploring creative projects she had long put on hold. One afternoon, as she unpacked the last of her boxes, Lila came across a photo album she had brought from the old house. Flipping through its pages, she saw images of happier times, family vacations, birthdays, and holiday gatherings. For a moment, nostalgia washed over her. She missed what her family used to be before things became so complicated. But as she closed the album and placed it on a shelf, she reminded herself that those memories didn't erase the hurt or betrayal she had endured. Her new routine quickly fell into place. She began taking evening walks around her neighborhood, enjoying the fresh air and discovering local cafes and parks. She even joined a small writing group at a nearby bookstore, where she met people who shared her passion for storytelling. For the first time in years, Lila felt connected, not just to others, but to herself. One evening, as she sat at her desk working on a personal project, Lila's phone buzzed with a message from an old neighbor. "Your family seems to be struggling without you," it read. She stared at the screen for a moment before setting the phone down without replying. It wasn't that she didn't care, she did, but Lila knew that going back would only pull her into the same toxic patterns she had worked so hard to escape. Instead of dwelling on what was behind her, Lila chose to focus on what lay ahead. She set new goals for herself, expanding her freelance business, traveling to places she'd always dreamed of visiting, and finishing the novel she had started years ago but never completed. Each day felt like a step closer to becoming the person she wanted to be. Occasionally, thoughts of Ethan or Sophie would creep into her mind, what they were doing now, or how they were coping, but Lila quickly learned to let those thoughts pass without holding on to them. She had given enough of herself to people who didn't value her. It was time to give that energy back to herself. As weeks turned into months, Lila realized just how much lighter she felt without the weight of constant conflict dragging her down. Her apartment wasn't just a new home, it was a symbol of everything she had fought for: independence, respect, and self-worth. And as she sat by her window one evening watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Lila smiled to herself. This was only the beginning of something beautiful, a life entirely her own. Expanding the story further, we can add layers of complexity, unexpected twists, and emotional depth to make the narrative even more engaging. Below is an extended and enriched version of the story that builds on the existing framework while introducing new dimensions. As Lila settled into her new apartment, she began to reflect on everything that had transpired. The betrayal, the accusations, and the weight of her family's expectations still lingered in her mind. One day, while unpacking a box of old documents she had brought from the family home, she stumbled upon a sealed envelope tucked inside a folder labeled Property Records. Curious, she opened it and discovered something that made her heart race: a legal document transferring ownership of the house to her from her grandparents years ago. The document was dated shortly after her grandfather's passing and included a handwritten note from him: "To my dearest Lila, this house is yours to build your future. Use it wisely and protect it from harm." Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized that her grandparents had entrusted her with this responsibility long before she had even understood its significance. The discovery brought a mix of emotions: gratitude for their trust, but also anger at her parents for hiding this from her. Determined to uncover the truth, Lila called her mother and asked about the document. Her mother hesitated before admitting that they had kept it a secret to avoid upsetting Aiden. "We didn't want him to feel left out," her mother explained. "You were always so independent, Lila. We thought you wouldn't mind if we let him believe he had a claim to the house." Lila was stunned by the admission. "So you let him treat me like an intruder in my own home? You let him and Romina walk all over me because you didn't want to hurt his feelings?" Her mother's silence spoke volumes. For Lila, this was the final confirmation that she had made the right decision to leave. Meanwhile, Sophie's life began unraveling in ways no one had anticipated. The fallout from being exposed as a thief strained her relationship with Aiden, who was already grappling with financial troubles he had kept hidden from everyone. Sophie confided in a close friend that she felt trapped in a marriage where she was constantly trying to prove her worth, not just to Aiden but to his entire family. "I thought marrying Aiden would give me stability," Sophie admitted during a tearful conversation. "But all I've done is try to live up to impossible expectations. And now I've ruined everything." Her friend suggested she seek therapy to address these feelings and figure out what she truly wanted for herself. Reluctantly, Sophie agreed. Over time, she began to confront the insecurities that had driven her actions and started taking steps toward rebuilding her life independently of Aiden's influence. Back at the family home, Aiden's financial troubles came to light when creditors began calling incessantly. It turned out that he had made several risky investments that had failed spectacularly, leaving him buried in debt. Without Lila's contributions to cover household expenses, maintaining the home became impossible. Their parents were devastated when they learned the extent of Aiden's irresponsibility. "You always acted like you were better than Lila," their father said angrily during one heated argument. But at least she knew how to manage her finances. The tension reached a breaking point when Aiden suggested selling some of their parents' belongings to make ends meet. His once proud demeanor crumbled under the weight of his failures, leaving him bitter and resentful. In contrast, Lila thrived in her new environment. She poured herself into her work and began writing a memoir about her experiences with family dynamics and self-discovery. The process was cathartic, allowing her to process the pain while finding meaning in it. Her memoir quickly gained attention online after she shared excerpts on social media. Readers resonated with her story of standing up for herself and breaking free from toxic relationships. Encouraged by their responses, Lila decided to publish the book independently. One day, as she prepared for a virtual book launch event, Lila received an email from Sophia. The subject line read, "An apology." In the message, Sophia expressed deep regret for everything she had done and thanked Lila for exposing the truth. "It forced me to take a hard look at myself," Sophia wrote. "I'm working on becoming a better person now." Lila appreciated the sentiment but chose not to reply immediately. She needed time to decide whether forgiveness was something she could offer. Months later, as Lila's book climbed bestseller lists and garnered critical acclaim, she received an unexpected call from a lawyer representing an anonymous client interested in purchasing the family home. Intrigued, she agreed to meet with them. To her surprise, the buyer turned out to be Sophia. "I want to buy it back," Sophia said earnestly during their meeting. "Not for Aiden or your parents, for myself. I've started over, and I want this house as part of my fresh start." Lila considered Sophie's offer carefully before agreeing under one condition: "If you're serious about starting over, then you need to promise me this house will be used for good, not as a place for more lies or manipulation." Sophia nodded solemnly. "I promise." The sale marked an unexpected full-circle moment for both women, one seeking redemption and the other reclaiming peace of mind. As Lila handed over the keys, she felt a sense of closure unlike anything she had experienced before. Returning home that evening, Lila sat by her window with a cup of tea in hand, watching as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold. She thought about how far she had come, from feeling powerless in her own home to becoming someone who could dictate her own terms. For Lila, this wasn't just an ending, it was a testament to resilience and growth. And as she opened her laptop to begin writing another chapter of her life story, she smiled softly to herself. This time, everything was exactly as it should be. This expanded version introduces deeper emotional layers while maintaining narrative momentum through twists like Sophie's redemption arc and Aiden's downfall. It also reinforces themes of independence, forgiveness, and personal growth while giving readers a satisfying yet thought-provoking conclusion. To expand the story further, we can delve deeper into the aftermath of Lila's departure, exploring how her decision to leave and sell the family home impacts everyone involved. Below is an additional section that adds emotional weight, complexity, and closure to the narrative. Months after Lila had moved out and sold the house, the ripple effects of her decision were felt by everyone she left behind. Her parents, who had always relied on Aiden's promises of stability, began to realize how much they had taken Lila's quiet contributions for granted. Without her paying the property taxes or helping with household expenses, their financial situation quickly deteriorated. The sale of the house provided them with temporary relief, but their extravagant habits soon drained what little savings they had left. Aiden and Romina, now living in a cramped rental apartment with their parents, found themselves at odds more frequently. The once confident Romina was now overworked and exhausted, juggling multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. Aiden's pride took a hit as he struggled to find a way out of his mounting debts. The strain on their marriage grew unbearable, and whispers of separation began circulating among those who knew them. For Lila, however, life had taken a turn for the better. In her new apartment, she found not only peace but also inspiration. Her memoir about family dynamics and personal growth became a bestseller, resonating with readers worldwide. She received countless messages from people who saw themselves in her story, individuals who had also struggled to set boundaries or stand up for themselves in toxic environments. One day, while attending a literary conference in another city, Lila was approached by an older woman who introduced herself as a fan of her work. Your book gave me the courage to leave a situation I thought I could never escape, the woman said with tears in her eyes. Thank you for sharing your story. Lila smiled warmly and replied, thank you for telling me that. It means more than you know. Despite her newfound success and sense of freedom, Lila occasionally wondered about her family. She didn't regret her decision to leave or sell the house, it had been necessary for her growth, but she couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness when she thought about how fractured their relationships had become. One evening, as she was leaving a book signing event at a local bookstore, she spotted Romina waiting outside. The once vibrant woman looked frail and worn down by life's hardships. Romina hesitated before approaching Lila, clutching a small bag in her hands. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, Romina began softly, her voice trembling. But I wanted to apologize again, for everything. Lila studied her for a moment before responding calmly. Romina, I've moved on from what happened. I hope you can do the same. Romina nodded and held out the bag. These are some of the things I took from you. I've kept them all this time because I didn't know how to make things right. Lila glanced at the bag but didn't take it. Instead, she said gently, keep them if they mean something to you now. What's done is done. Romina's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, thank you. Lila gave her a small nod before walking away into the night. Back in her apartment that evening, Lila sat by the window with a cup of tea in hand. The city lights twinkled below as she reflected on how far she had come since leaving her family home. She no longer felt anger or resentment, only gratitude for the lessons she had learned along the way. Her life was no longer defined by others' expectations or judgments, but by her own choices and values. And as she opened her laptop to begin writing her next book, a story about resilience and forgiveness, she smiled to herself. This was not just an ending, it was also a beginning, a testament to the strength it takes to reclaim one's life and build something beautiful out of chaos. Before we wrap up this story, I'd like to take a moment to connect with you, my amazing viewers. If you've ever faced a situation where standing up for yourself felt like the hardest but most necessary thing to do, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And if this journey has resonated with you or inspired you in any way, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Also, if you enjoy stories about resilience, personal growth, and overcoming challenges, make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. There's so much more to come, and I can't wait to share it all with you. Thank you for being here and for supporting this journey, it means the world to me.